That was 2 people. And I know there's more than 2 people in here. Good evening. Thank you. I'm just scanning the audience, and I can't help but notice y'all really look good. In fact, you look so good, you should turn to somebody and tell them I look good. Of course, you know, in my experience, people are prone to arrogance, so you should look back and tell them, yeah, but I look better. Yeah. I'm so delighted that you have joined us tonight for what I expect will be a very interesting, informative, helpful dialogue about a very important matter for the country. The Bahamas has been significantly challenged over the last several years. Hurricane caused in excess of $3 billion worth of loss to our economy, not to mention the lives lost and families disrupted by it. And then shortly thereafter followed by a pandemic, which continues today, though eased somewhat from its peak, and yet causing more billions of dollars in loss to our economy. And in all this pressure, economic, financial pressure, the government of the Bahamas has had to respond. It has had to make decisions to increase expenditure for support of the society at a time when its own revenue was significantly reduced by virtue of the circumstances in which it found itself. As a consequence, we've seen historic levels of deficit in the country. We've seen a pace of national debt increase that we have not seen. And even as the pandemic wanes, the government is still confronted with the realities of what to do to ensure that, that as it continues to support the society, the people, it manages the fiscal affairs so as not to create an unsustainable situation. And for that reason, we are here tonight. The Government and Public Policy Institute, which is an academy of the university, focused on creating and encouraging public policy dialogue, generating research in the area of public policy being anything that the government is doing as a response to the needs, interests, and aspirations of the people of this country, the concerns and issues that confront them, and providing training in areas of public policy and also consulting services in the same space. Minister, Senator, the Honourable Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs, our distinguished lecturer tonight, Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, faculty and staff of the University of the Bahamas, students of the University of the Bahamas, distinguished invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media. We try, through the Government and Public Policy Institute, to encourage evidence-based, research-based, objective dialogue in matters of public policy. Everyone has an opinion, and they are entitled to it. Sometimes informed, sometimes not so informed. Everybody has a perspective. entitled to it, sometimes informed, sometimes not so informed. Our role, our responsibility is not to so much express our opinions on matters, but try to get where we can through primary research, sometimes secondary sources, maybe sometimes credible tertiary sources, information that helps you, helps us understand better the things that's happening in our society. And if you're going to understand what government policy is there a better place to get it from than from the government? If you're going to understand public policy, is there a better place to get it from than the public policy makers? And that's what these lectures are designed for. And I welcome you and I thank you for responding to our invitation tonight. I want to ask Mrs. Jenny Bethel, please, to come and lead us in the singing of the national anthem as we honor our country. And so I'm going to ask you to stand, please, as we do so.
Lift up your head to the rising sun, Bahamaland. March on to glory, your bright banners waving high. See how the world marks the manner of your bearing. Pledge to excel through love and unity, pressing onward, march together to a common lofty goal, steady sunward, though the weather hide the wide and treacherous shore. Lift up your head to the rising sun, Bahamaland, till the road you trod lead unto your God.
Thank you. You may remain standing, given that we just got led to God, to whom we are going to have an opening prayer to. So I'm going to ask Natasha Pyfram to come and lead us in prayer.
Let us pray. Eternal and all-wise God, we thank you, O God, for this very moment in time. We thank you, O God, for gathering us here, O God, for a discussion, for a dialogue. Father God, and we pray that your wisdom rules this evening. We pray, O God, that you said in your word that all wisdom comes from you. And so we pray, oh God, that even as we lead forward, God, as a nation, God, that we will allow the wisdom of God to continue to lead us, oh God, in everything that we ought to do. and what is right, oh God, for nation building. Father, we pray, oh God, for the presenters here tonight. We pray for the information that will be disseminated. We pray, oh God, for the hearers, oh God, that will hear. And we pray, oh God, that we will not only hear, but God, do what is said in this place this evening, oh God, that we can become stronger together. Bless, oh God, the remainder of this event, oh God, that we give to you so humbly. We are a grateful people, and we thank you, God, that you are among us, with us, oh God, to help us in every venture. And so we ask, God, that you bless it this night. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
You may be seated. I have properly welcomed you, I believe, on behalf of the Government and Public Policy Institute, and thank you again for joining us. We have also folks joining us by live stream, and we tried not to tell you in advance because then you might not have come. So we have them also joining us by live stream. So with that said, I want to invite Mrs. Leslie Archer, Policy Fellow in the Government and Public Policy Institute, to come and introduce our presenter tonight. You're free to give a little encouragement.
Good evening, everyone. The Honourable Michael B. Halkitis was born on February 1st, 1969 in Nassau, Bahamas. After attending St. Augustine's College, Mr. Halkitis began his post-secondary education at the College of the Bahamas. He completed his Bachelor of Arts degree in economics at the University of Western Ontario. In 1995, Mr. Halkitis qualified as a chartered financial analyst. Mr. Halkitis was first elected to the Parliament of the Bahamas in 2002 and again in 2012. He currently serves as Minister of Economic Affairs and leader of government business in the Senate. His portfolio responsibilities include promotion of financial services, small business development, ease of doing business, consumer protection, and international trade. Under his many years of leadership, the Bahamas' Ministry of Finance was not only brought into the modern age through the digitization of its operations, but also through the implementation of major taxation reforms, which have been applauded for their seamless integration. Currently, he oversees the nation's trade and financial services industry, aims to improve our country's ease of doing business, and directs our country's digitization efforts. Mr. Halkitis continues to play an important role in helping to stabilize the country's finances. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the Honourable Michael B. Halkitis to the stage as he offers his presentation on post-COVID-19 pandemic fiscal policy options for the Bahamas.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, and good evening to all. You know, I sort of flinched when the presenter there called off the dates, you know, because when I was, probably most of you who are students were not even born yet, and you know, I walked these hallowed halls of this now university 30 plus years ago. But it's a pleasure to be here this evening, and firstly, I would like to thank the University of the Bahamas and its Government and Public Policy Institute for this invitation to present this evening at this very important forum. I recall when last in government, it was very, very important to us that the whole transition of the College of the Bahamas to the University of the Bahamas, it was the vision of the then Prime Minister to ensure that we had an academic institution that was capable of standing toe-to-toe with regional peers in terms of the quality of education provided, and to inform public policy development by the integration of academic research into the decision-making process. The advancements at the University of Bahamas allowing for the creation of institutions such as the Government and Public Policy Institute, where constructive debate and discussion on government policy is possible, is commendable. In a few short months, the Commonwealth of the Bahamas will celebrate its Golden Jubilee, a recognition and celebration of the milestone achievement of 50 years as an independent nation. The achievement of this milestone has not been by happenstance, nor has it been easy. Through much perseverance, dedication, and resilience, we have continued to advance and build our country to its current state. What we have achieved as a nation over this short period of time is nothing short of remarkable. As a people united, we have achieved an orderly and peaceful transition to full democratic, i.e. majority rule, established one of the finest tourism industries in the world, providing jobs and elevating many homes from poverty into the middle class, a strong and robust financial services sector, a broad-based provision of health care and education, advanced levels of technology and infrastructure to support most modern business environments, and many more advancements over the years, and we acknowledge that there's much work left to be done. The world of today, however, is not the world of 50 years ago. The world has seen the emergence of new political unions, such as the European Union, which has changed the direction of global trade. Global economic trends have shifted with the increased emergence and influence of countries such as China in the global trade and political arena. The point is that the world has grown and evolved tremendously since independence, and so must our approach to fiscal management. The economic structure of the Bahamas over the last 50 years has remained fairly constant. The key features of this structure have included a dominance of the tourism industry, being the largest contributor to GDP and employing the largest share of people. Financial services, particularly offshore financial services, being the second largest contributor to GDP. A reliance on imports for domestic consumption, as well as providing many of the items consumed by our visitors. And government's historic reliance on forms of indirect taxation such as customs duties, etc., until the introduction of the more direct methods, such as value-added tax back in 2015. The most pressing economic issue facing us is the continued recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on both the health of the population and the health of our economy. The shared experience of nations has been a slowdown of economic activity, resulting in lower revenues, increased costs on COVID-related health and social safety net spending, higher budget deficits, and higher levels of public debt. For small developing countries in the region with open tourism-dependent economies, the impact has been particularly acute. In the Bahamas, we have seen our deficit as a percentage of GDP go from 1.6% in 2018-2019, 7.1% in 2019-2020, 13.7% in 2020-2021, 5.4% in 2021-2022 as we begin to recover. In numerical terms, that was from 215 million up to 799 million in 2019-2020, 1.3 billion at the height of the pandemic in 2020-2021, and reverting now to 689.5 million 2021-2022 as the recovery begins to sink in. It is forecasted that we will have a deficit of $564 million in the current budget year, 2022-2023, and a downward trajectory thereafter is the projection. That represents 4.3% of GDP. So 1.6, 7.1, 13.7, 5.4, 4.3, and we are hopeful that this trajectory will continue downward. Likewise, for government debt to GDP, 57% in 2018-2019, 72% in 2019-2020, 100.9% in 2020-2021, again at the height of the pandemic, 87% in 2021-2022, with a forecast to go down to 80% in 23-24, 77% in 24-25, with the goal of gradually moving towards 50% in 2030-2031. So what we have seen is a rapid escalation of deficits and public debt, but a more gradual return to what we call more normal levels. Given our relatively low debt profile pre-Dorian and pre-COVID-19, i.e. around 57%, and so with the impact of Hurricane Dorian and the COVID-19 pandemic, the Bahamas was able to access credit markets and multilateral financial institutions to support employment in the public and private sector and the elevated levels of COVID-19 spending. You will recall that the government at the time decided not to furlough any public sector workers, so that is how they supported employment in the public sector, and as well offered incentives to businesses to maintain certain levels of employment in their private businesses. And so some people will say in certain circles, it is what it is. The issue at hand now is how we rebuild the fiscal headroom. How do we recreate the space to put us in a position to ensure a stable economic environment and to be able to respond to potential future shocks? The second related but equally important question is, how do we rebuild in a more sustainable, resilient manner to be able to withstand future shocks, either of a climate nature, more intense storms, a health nature, and I heard a new word coined last night. The first time I heard it was the triple-demic, that, what is it, COVID, more cases of the flu, and now something called RSV, that is being, you see elevated levels of this in the United States. Climate events, more health-related events, or disruptions brought on by events of a geopolitical nature, conflict, war, economic blockade, embargoes, sanctions, etc. And we have seen the effect brought on by higher energy prices in the early stages of the Ukraine conflict, and the impact as well on food prices. So how do we put ourselves in a position to be able to, as a country, rebuild that space that allows us to respond to these occurrences? And so the question this evening is fiscal policy options in a post-COVID-19 era. I'm sure a lot of you are economics students or finance students, and so you know that fiscal policy is defined as the use of government spending and taxation to influence the conditions of the economy. And in the Bahamas, our taxation remains largely of the indirect type, with the absence of personal income or corporation tax. Monetary policy, the other tool used by governments, simply defined as how a country controls its money supply through the central bank, largely through what we call open market operations and their effect on interest rates, i.e. affecting the price of money and the amount of money in the system. Fiscal policy can broadly be classified into two types, expansionary or contractionary. You may have heard of stimulus or austerity. And for small countries facing the financial constraints brought on by the pandemic, the challenge is, how do you find the resources to fund a stimulus or an expansionary fiscal policy program, fiscal program? Where do you get the money? You already have elevated levels of debt. You don't have a lot of room. And so how do we find the resources, bearing in mind limitations in your ability to tax without choking off any economic recovery that's ongoing, so you don't want to raise taxes. You have limitations in borrowing capacity brought on by the already elevated levels of debt, and that is compounded by the difficult market conditions for emerging market credits as a result of what's going central banks' actions to combat inflation. Central banks around the world have been raising interest rates. And so that makes the credit environment very difficult, particularly for emerging, that we call emerging market countries, if you want to go to the capital markets. And of course, we always have those rating agencies waiting in the wings. All right. Let me just get back to my page. So you have all of these challenges. And so what do? You have very little room. If you are able to find the resources, how do you allocate those resources, not to go back to business as usual, but how do you build back better? How do you build back a more diversified, resilient, sustainable, and inclusive and balanced economy? Because it is generally accepted when you are discussing amongst countries and amongst economists and observers that we don't want to go just back to the status quo. We want to build back a more resilient and sustainable economy. And when we speak of diversification, in our case, diversification within the tourism industry in terms of product offering in response to changing market demands, and how do we diversify geographically throughout the Family Islands. Sustainable and resilient based on the use of renewables and the expansion of the blue, green, and orange economies. And how do you do all of this while maintaining your level of public services, including upkeep and expansion of infrastructure? And how do you maintain adequate levels of support to the very important state-owned enterprises and state-related enterprises like the University of the Bahamas? We believe that the answer, in the case of the Bahamas, is found in a combination of tax measures designed to promote growth in the area of construction, particularly residential construction, incentives to invest in renewables, including making electric vehicles more affordable, measures to lower the price of food. Added to this is a commitment to increase and maintain capital expenditure at a level of around 3.5% of GDP as an added support to the economy. Largest allocations in our capital budget is to public works, finance, education, and health. Also on the expenditure side, on the policy side, we have amended the Public Finance Management Act to provide for a portion of the real property tax and taxes collected under the Road Traffic Act to remain in the islands in which they are collected, 10% in this budget year, 17% next year, and 25% thereafter. On the revenue side, measures to tighten revenue administration, in particular amendments to the real property tax and the VAT Act. And so our objective in this budget is to use those twin tools of fiscal policy, taxation and revenue measures, to foster an environment that supports economic growth, that is inclusive and supports development. In this budget, the current year, we introduced no new taxes and provided incentives and tax reductions in the areas of customs duty reductions on widely consumed food items, 56 items actually in the last budget, to bring down prices and offset some of the impact of global inflation. Duty reductions on a broad range of building materials to promote construction, and again, to mitigate some of the impact of global price increases in building materials. Tax incentives to support home ownership and home construction and/or renovation, and the extension of these incentives to property purchases for the purpose of home construction. We expanded duty reductions to promote the use of renewables, particularly electric vehicles, and we are providing incentives for agriculture and fisheries to promote investment in food production, thereby moving towards more food security. We've committed in this budget to increase the capital expenditure allocation from $265 million last year to $371 million this year to support infrastructure and employment. And so, given the fact that we have largely indirect taxation, the absence of corporation and personal income tax, we are using the tax tools that we have to provide incentives to spur economic growth, and we are increasing expenditure, particularly in the capital budget, to help support the infrastructure and support employment creation. Our recovery and growth strategy is comprised of 4 elements: economic growth, better revenue administration, control of expenditure, and seeking out new sources of revenue. Economic growth, of course, is led by the recovery in tourism, where we are experiencing strong growth in 2022, and we expect that to persist into 2023, 2024. Reforms in our National Economic Council process to consider new investment projects to move them through the pipeline more speedily, thereby putting shovels in the ground, so to speak, and creating employment. I spoke of the increase in the rate of capital spending to support infrastructure. Support for entrepreneurs, particularly in the areas of sustainable industries, including the tourism segments. And in this regard, it is very important to focus on the development of linkages to improve access to the tourism-related opportunities to more Bahamians, aimed at supporting sustainability of tourism through the development of more sustainable livelihoods and businesses that provide product, service, and activities that both contribute to and benefit from the tourism industry. And we want to do that having cognizance of the changing tastes and appetite of visitors. We are also pursuing an accelerated digitization of government services to increase to improve the ease of doing business, and that digitization has been proven to actually add to the GDP. All right. One moment. In the area of improved revenue administration, there's always 2 sides to this coin: the taxes and the spending, and what related to the taxes are the revenue. And we always have this conversation of how do you divide your revenue increase between what is derived from buoyancy of the economy and what you can get from improved revenue administration. We believe that we can get some significant gains from improved revenue administration. We have reinvigorated the Revenue Enhancement Unit to be able to close the loophole, so to speak, and make sure that what is due and payable is payable. And as I spoke to earlier, we have made some reforms in the real property tax legislation to improve compliance. We are working with the commercial banks, and they are assisting us in the collection as well, and we expect that once that is established, that framework is established, to reap benefits going into the future. We have also established the Revenue Policy Committee, which is represented by all of the heads of the major revenue agencies to monitor revenue performance and to come up with best practices. We are pursuing expenditure control. The main element of it is the reestablishment of the Central Purchasing Unit to realize economies of scale in common purchases, and we continue our review of our state-owned enterprises. In the area of new revenue sources, we are exploring opportunities in the carbon market to monetize what we think are significant carbon assets, and we are continuing our efforts to bring more businesses into the formal economy. So in the short term, the fiscal policy tools available to governments to support economic recovery and growth are limited, severely limited, particularly when we talk about small economies like the Bahamas, due to the additional debt taken on during the pandemic. The key, we believe, is to use targeted tax incentives and spending allocations to generate employment and growth in order to gradually rebuild that fiscal headroom. Over the medium to longer term, we must address tax policy, including our concessions regime, the reform of state-owned enterprises, and more targeted capital expenditure. We have set some aggressive, but we believe achievable targets for revenue growth, deficit reduction, and the gradual decline of our debt-to-GDP ratio to more acceptable levels that will restore the fiscal headroom and hence our ability to respond to future shocks. We face many challenges, and a position that has built up over many years will not be solved in 1 year, but it requires consistent and focused attention. Nevertheless, we are optimistic, we are bullish on the Bahamas. Our early returns point to a strong recovery, but recent experience have shown that we must remain vigilant. And I can assure you that we remain committed to doing the work that is necessary to move from recovery not only to growth, but balanced development and shared prosperity. So thank you very much for listening to me this evening, and I'll be happy to take any questions. I know I touched on a number of things, and I hope I piqued your interest and we can have a lively question and answer session. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister, for, I thought, a quite comprehensive framework for responding fiscally in this, in what would be a post-COVID era. Before we get to audience questions, I'm going to pose a few questions to the Minister.
Okay.
And then we will allow questions from yourselves. I only want to ask the audience, please, to confine your commentary to as brief as you can so that your question can get in. That way we can ask as many questions as possible. I also know that we have, I think, Minister, 2 sets of business students here,
okay.
Groups. And so hopefully they will also pose some questions to you. My first question, Minister, is you mentioned something that has been the topic of some discussion, debate in the Bahamas for a long time. You noted that the Bahamas' economic structure remains constant and has remained constant over all these 50 years. There are people who suggest that that structure needs to change. Do you see that happening anytime soon, or do you see us in the medium long term really having the same economic structure?
I know that particularly in the midst and in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic, when global travel was virtually shut down, our tourism industry had come to a grinding halt, there had always been the call or the cry, so to speak, for diversification. We need to do something other than tourism. And when we had the COVID-19 pandemic and we actually saw, what we perhaps thought was unimaginable, the industry come to a halt, those cries were elevated. On the flip side, the reason that we have been able to rebound so quickly is because we have a tourism-based economy. And a tourism-based economy that is a country, you have a tourism-based economy, and you are in some places less than 100 miles away, in the case of Nassau, 35 minutes away by jet from your major source market. 82+% of our visitors come from the United States. So there's pros and cons. Yes, in the event of severe disruption, you remember your 9/11s and then the drastic example of the COVID-19, the industry is impacted. On the flip side, it also recovers much more quickly. So I don't see tourism being supplanted as the major industry in the Bahamas anytime soon, and I don't think it's desirable to look to supplant it every time soon. Tourism is a viable industry. It's a multi-trillion-dollar global industry. I think what we must strive for, and what another criticism that we have had of our industry is the lack of local ownership. People look at the large resorts and the big players in the industry and says, well, the Bahamians don't own it. I think we need to continue to strive for more ownership in the industry. And I think we are seeing a lot of that with the development and the expansion of the whole Airbnb phenomenon. And I think what we must also work towards is two things: geographic diversification in the Family Islands and the real promotion of the smaller boutique operations, particularly in our Family Islands. And what is so profound about that is that the tourism people will tell you that in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, visitor tastes have changed so that now people are looking for smaller, more quiet destinations. They're looking for experiences. They're looking to, when they visit somewhere, to be able to become immersed in the culture, et cetera. So that presents an opportunity. And we must, we've been talking about linkages ever since tourism was a thing. We've been talking about linkages, and we've had various BAICs and our various organizations actually formed to pursue that. But we need to double down on that to make sure that the opportunities that do derive from these major operations accrue to the Bahamians. There's more sense of ownership, and we are diversified geographically throughout the Bahamas so that we're more resilient in the case of storm, in the case of pandemic. You diversify your product offering. In the middle of, this is a long answer, but in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, we had this phenomenon of wealthy individuals coming to the Bahamas because they felt, if I needed to be locked down, what better place to be locked down? And so if you diversify your offerings, you're better able to withstand them. So short answer, yes, in times of drastic disruption, you see the impact, but tourism has really bounced back, and the Bahamas is leading the region in its recovery. So you don't supplant it, you just get more from it.
Thank you. The pandemic has been the central disruptive force. Mm-hmm. Is it still having a drag on the economy?
I think the drag has the economy is bouncing back very strongly. I think it was something like 13%, forecasted another 8% this year. I think the drag has receded. I think there's again significant pent-up demand, despite the high costs for the airline tickets, despite the increasing costs for the accommodation, significant pent-up demand, particularly in the United States. I think if there is a drag, it might be people being cautious about investment. But I think in terms of, if you look at just at the performance of the economy, it's forecasted by, for example, next year, we would have exceeded the arrival numbers if we don't do it by December. So I think that the drag has receded. In terms of the active sort of impact, of course, we're still feeling the sort of residual impact because, as I said, and many countries have had to do it, and we had to do it. We had to increase the level of debt because we didn't want to send people home from their jobs. We needed to be able to make sure that unemployment assistance, et cetera, was in place, health care, expanded services. And so the drag you would feel was the debt that was accumulated to be able to do those things. That's on your books, so your costs are higher. But in terms of the actual current activity, I think we're pretty much almost at the pre-pandemic levels.
Two more questions before we turn to audience, Minister. You mentioned tax measures to promote growth. Maybe you had some thoughts around like what measures?
Yes, we did what we did in this last budget. For example, we looked at it, and our decision is at the time your economy is recovering. A lot of businesses took it on the chin during the pandemic. A lot of people took it on the chin during the pandemic. You don't want to go in and say, okay, well, we need to close this gap, and so we need to raise taxes, because then that's counterproductive. You're hurting your consumers, and you're impacting your business. And so what we said is the best way we think is to develop a four-pronged strategy that I spoke about. We're going to do some not raising taxes, but we're going to target some areas that we think will, if we reduce the cost by reducing the taxes, that will create some activity. And so we did some things in the area of home construction in terms of first-time exemptions for homeowners. So we extended that to if you're buying a property. First it was if you're buying a home, you can get the stamp exemption. That reduces the closing costs. We extended that to if you were purchasing a property for the purpose of construction. We went and we reduced duty on building supplies, because the experience had been prices were going up globally. Reduced that in an effort to make these things cheaper, so that someone who was contemplating a decision to do some construction, we did what we could to bring the cost down. And some other things in terms of exemptions and economic zones, et cetera. And so the idea is, if you make it cheaper for people to do things, they will do some activity. It's similar in the Family Islands. We don't have as I said, the income and the corporation tax where we can do rebates, et cetera. And again, the number of tools that you have, particularly in an economy like ours, is limited. And so we felt that those sorts of exemptions combined with improved revenue administration and some targeted spending, working together would support the recovery that's ongoing.
Having sat where you sat,
yes,
I note your four-pronged approach of growth, lead with growth. I think very important. Revenue administration, expenditure, and then looking for other sources. Sometimes the policy objective is stated. The execution is challenging. What do you see there?
You have to execute. If you take your eyes off it, the execution will be challenging. And so you have to pursue, because it's easy to write it down on the paper and leave it. It's not going to happen by itself. Sometimes you have to tweak legislation. Sometimes you have to change policy. And sometimes you have to do things like management by walking around. So you have to keep a scorecard, because you go to a budget and you do a debate, and then what you have to do is at intervals you have to start ticking off, because you don't want to be back there the following year and you said all these things and nothing got done. And so the execution, the key to it is just keep your eyes on it.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, anybody? Yes, sir.
Okay, good evening, Senator Halkitis and Ambassador Dai. Good evening. So my question is relating to sustainable businesses. Earlier you mentioned that the government is going to be putting a lot of investment into sustainable businesses, and definitely been hearing a lot of that going around. But how would you define what a sustainable business is, and what would be the process towards getting that type of investment or attention with a sustainable product?
Sustainable businesses are businesses that, for example, in the green economy, in terms of agriculture and food production, anything in the area of renewables, utilizing renewables, providing renewables. In the area of the marine environment, sustainable fishing, etc. in the area of, when we talk about the green economy, we're talking about the sort of ecotourism and the small resorts and the small destinations. And so we look at those as sustainable industries, anything using renewables, talking about food security, sustainable marine harvesting or production. We have, there's some grants available under the Ministry of Agriculture in conjunction with the Bahamas Development Bank, as well as the SPDC are making grants available, particularly as it relates to agriculture. So the key is funding remains, that's the biggest challenge for businesses. But one of our challenges, I should have said in my presentation, is one of our challenges is to, yes, the government wants to support entrepreneurs, but we also have to do some more in terms of mobilizing private capital to support good projects. So those are what we call sustainable, and there are several, options available through the government, either through direct financing or the provision of guarantees. So SBDC, Bahamas Development Bank Venture Fund. We acknowledge sometimes it takes a while, but I think the good projects rise to the top.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much for sharing that. So also, University of the Bahamas has been advancing a lot in their small island sustainability program. So it would be great to see almost like a pathway from going through that program and being able to engage in, I guess, the entrepreneurial side of applying what we're learning in that program to to the real world.
All right. Good point.
I was just going to say, Minister, that policy, that's me. That's a policy, it's a great invitation for all of these great minds to think about what could be a sustainable business, eh?
Yes.
Senator, Minister Halkitis, how are you?
Good, good. Mr.
So I noticed that you spoke a lot about construction, and
yes,
obviously I'm the president of the Bahamian Contractors Association. Two questions. One, we recognize that the current policy is to do a lot of investment from the government into the residential housing market, led by, right now, the government of the Bahamas and the Minister of Housing, which is good. But the question I have for you is that, how do you measure the risk in the activity that the policy has changed to build more houses now, considering that the administration before, and probably a couple of years into the last administration that you served on, we start to see alarming numbers of defaulting homeowners through the Bahamas Mortgage Corporation and other clearing banks. And that's the first question.
Okay.
How do you measure the risk there?
You could ask the second one too.
The second question is, because you've consistently managed to target that construction is so much a huge part of our economy, do you recognize an opportunity for more revenue generation by seeking out more stringent policy measures that would limit the amount of participation in the sector that's over $1 billion, that's from outside the country, not so much bringing the monies in, but exporting the monies out because of the number of persons who are doing work in that sector on the ownership side who may not necessarily be in the Bahamas and staying here with their money. They repatriate a lot of the monies on the investor side. You have a lot of persons coming here, a lot of money engage in the market here, but then send the market money back out. That's the second question.
In terms of the first question, how do you gauge the risk? You have to do more stringent vetting, and we know the legacy issues as it relates to public housing, but we know also the benefits in terms of employment generation and economic activity, and the social benefits of home ownership. So there are a lot of benefits. I think what we have to do is correct some of those legacy issues that perhaps led to not so stringent adherence to the strict qualification criteria. In terms of the I think the foreign involvement in the construction industry, I think the policy is to minimize that. But as you would know, there's always claims of special expertise, et cetera. But you know, it's and I think you would be aware as well as when you come to some of the you know, the artisans and that level, some of the challenges that we have. I think what we need to do is continue and expand our training programs, because, you know, so that we can get people, you know, certified where certification is warranted. And we have to enforce the policy of Bahamians, unless, you know, it's the specialized work that Bahamians cannot do. And we need to, you know, really, I think, make public some of the opportunities that are here within the country, because, you know, as policymakers, you have people coming to you saying, I can't find, all right? And then on the other side, you have people saying, I ain't got nothing to do. So how do you, you know, bring those two together? And I think that's more about information sharing, all right?
My staff told me they know I have a bad D. So they said it would be easier if those of you with questions could line up to the mic. Yeah. And then I could come on this side for them folk. See how smart the University of Bahamas is?
This question could be for you too. Anyway, good evening, Brother Halkitis. It is so good to have you here.
Thank you.
I noticed you started off when you begin your contribution, your information, reminiscing about the time when you were here and mentioning how your youth in reverse.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I have a little bit more years on you.
One or two.
Than that. And so, and the other day I was listening, I heard Brother LaRoda at NIB talking about the possibility of, man, there mightn't be any NIB left by the time I come to get my money, and I soon to that age. And I know others, we know we have this aging population now here in our community. What considerations have been given with the government to ensure that when I come to my golden years, that there is something there for me? Because I've made my contributions these many years.
Yes.
So I'm looking for that little thing on the side.
Yeah.
And again, you know, I also have the other role because I'm also the president of the Bahamas Alzheimer's Association.
Okay.
And again, that is one of the concerns because we know we have the aging population. We know that we will have persons who may be living and their families who will have to now take care of those persons who will more than likely be living with dementia or with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
What types of initiatives or what considerations have been made with regards to ensuring that I got that little thing?
Right. Yeah, we have to make sure that, you know, it's a concern around the world. Every once in a while you get these actuarial reports and they say if nothing is done, you go broke by X years. And I think they just did one in the US as well with their Social Security program. But I can tell you that I can speak for this administration, and I'm sure all, you know, administrations, to say that we are committed to the sustainability of the program. And so there are several options. You know, the NIB gets its returns from contributions that are made, the investment, the return on investments, you know, contributions and investment return. And so we have to address increasing the level of compliance to make sure that, you know, people are paying what they are supposed to pay, and that the funds of national insurance are invested in such a way to generate the maximum returns, given the fact that it's a social security system. So there's a certain level of risk that you shouldn't go beyond. Having said that, there are other elements. You can look at, for example, the administrative percentage and making sure that that is, not out of whack. And then the other, elements are looking at things like increasing retirement age, increasing contributions. But again, you're looking at those within the context of the state of the economy and what people can bear. So I think in the short term, emphasis has to be on compliance, increasing the level of compliance, and maximizing the investment returns. Having said that as well, I think it was envisaged, back in, I think, 73 or 74, when the fund was formed, that there would be sort of periodic increases in the contribution level so that you don't come to a point where you don't do it for a number of years and then all of a sudden you have to do it by a certain large amount. But first order of business is increasing compliance, optimizing your investment returns, and then you look at things like maybe adjusting the retirement age and the contribution percentage or the calculation. So don't be afraid. I think I couldn't speak to it currently. That's something I'll have to inform myself. But I know, for example, sometimes there's this allegation that the government borrows from NIB and doesn't pay. The government does pay. And they have also, for a number of years, had the opportunity to invest overseas to diversify their holdings. But I'm not totally abreast of how it is now. But I think I'll have to inform myself. But I don't think it's a problem. Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah, I'll have to when I come back.
Good evening.
Good evening, sir.
My question, well, two of them. Mm-hmm. The first one is, to start, in my social studies books, in my high school life, and a lot of my primary school life, we've been taught that our country has around 700 islands and keys.
Yes.
But as you look around, we seem to only advertise one of them. Mm-hmm. Do you think that a lot of our country's current problems could be solved if we were to expand more job opportunities to a lot of our major islands instead of keeping around 400,000 people locked to a singular island?
Yes, most definitely. And that's what I was talking about when I spoke about diversifying your tourism in particular geographically within the country. I speak of tourism, but that goes for the other industries as well. The challenge is finding that right pace. So, for example, we saw, again, in a previous administration, there was the talk of the anchor projects. And one example of it was what happened in Exuma with the sandals. And one of the drawbacks of it was an increase in the price of housing, the unavailability of housing. And so when you're talking about that, it has to be, you have to make sure you scale it properly so that you don't have those disruptions and have those unintended consequences. But yes, I think a big part of strengthening our economy is diversifying throughout the islands because you lose the concentration, the over-concentration, or the extent that you have the concentration in the province. And so, it even works, for example, if you have a hurricane that might hit one portion of the country, another portion is still running.
Okay. My second question is, does the government have any policies to encourage or any incentives to allow for any entrepreneurs to go outside of New Providence mm-hmm. and start building various industries or communities that could allow for depopulation, so to say, out of New Providence, mm-hmm. especially mm-hmm. now that, for example, Hurricane Dorian has hit Grand Bahama, devastated it, and a lot of people have had to move to New Providence to seek mm-hmm. out education, jobs, and whatnot.
Yes, there are incentives well, there are several in place depending on what you want to do. There's incentives under, for example, the Hotel Encouragement Act that provides incentives, Family Island Encouragement Act that provides incentives. I think and then under various other forms of, depending on what you want to do. For example, if you're producing something, there's concessions under the Industries Encouragement Act that allow for importation of materials and equipment. Family Island allows for, importation of equipment and inventory and even vehicles now. So there are, under various forms of legislation, there are incentives, and it's just a matter of seeking them out and finding out what it is. You can contact the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Economic Affairs and, say, this is what I'm thinking of doing, what is available to me.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hi.
Sorry, I was looking over here.
Yes, the older people on this side, young people on that side.
Oh, my bad.
Yes, my question relates to the discussion in the economy about a recession, whether it's in the United States, and whether, recently in the paper today, we have one of our regular pundits talking about the recession and coming to end the Bahamas.
Right.
Probably we have now until December to prepare, kind of thing.
Right.
So my question is, has the government factored anything in about a recession in its strategy? What's its position on it? And if it has factored that in, how it intends to address it if they think there will be a recession?
My first reaction is, let's not claim it. All right, let's not receive that, right? Let's not speak it. There are some people, we know the background, and it's funny because if you really think about it, it's like it's a good problem to have. I mean, I think, maybe I'm wrong, right? But they say in the United States, there's so much money being spent, so much money going around that we have to do something to slow this down. So the economy, there's so much money being generated and spent in the economy that we have to raise interest rates to slow this down, to stop inflation. We're not in a recession in the Bahamas. Our growth has been solid. Our growth prospects are solid. And so we think we'll continue with pretty good growth into 2023 and even into 2024. Our belief is that, as I said earlier, we are right next to our major source market. So, for example, even in a recession, in a depression, everybody doesn't stop traveling. Maybe they'll decide to go someplace closer, which is just the Bahamas. We cannot, if you start to anticipate and say you're preparing for inflation and recession, you bring it on because, you stop spending money, you don't invest, you don't do things, and then that in itself brings on the recession. So I wouldn't, it's not something, of course, we look at our projections and we look at the risks. The risks are increasing costs because of inflation and what's going on in terms of conflict. But you weigh that against what you see and the advanced bookings, for example, that you get from tourism and investments, for example, in the pipeline, people who have already begun. And so we feel good. I don't dismiss all the talk, but I don't get caught up on it because, again, the U.S. economy continues to roll along, and that's our major trading partner. The recession is defined classically as 2 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth. So minus 0.1, minus 0.5. Technically, that's a recession. But what I'm saying is, sometimes it's a headline in the States, different economists on different cable stations are talking about it, and someone has one opinion, someone has the next. We tend to pick it up and blast it. I don't think, that is not something that we're concerned about at this time, or not something that preoccupies us. We see solid growth.
Good night, Minister.
Yes, sir.
My question tonight is, what are your thoughts on Minister Pintard's statement about price controls and the retail is concerned?
What was his statement?
Price controls move disaster.
That was the headline.
Yeah, the headline. Yes, sir.
That wasn't his statement. I didn't see his statement.
Oh, sorry, the headline.
I won't address that directly because I didn't see the statement.
Okay.
But what I would say, our intention was, and I think the Prime Minister spoke about this, you know, you look at inflation and you look at rising prices and you decide, okay, what can we do? Construction, material, plywood prices, et cetera, up through the roof. Food prices continue to escalate because of global inflation. We reduced duties. We didn't see that sort of full impact, and that is always a danger when the government says we're going to reduce duties. Does it flow through to the final consumer? You have discussions, you know, with the shipping companies to try and convince them to lower their prices. Again, does that flow all the way through? So what we decided to do was amend the price control list for a period of, I think, 3 months in terms of pharmaceuticals, 6 months in terms of grocery, to bring some immediate relief. We committed that at the end of the period, we'll look at it to see, did it work? Should it be extended? Any adjustment we can make. So I don't see it as a disaster at all. We continue to speak with those who are impacted in the business community. Approached us. They had some concerns. We sat down with them. The Prime Minister himself listened to them, asked them to help us, or when I say help us, give us their views on how we can achieve the same thing. Because in the meeting, we both profess to have the same objective to bring relief. And so we said that we will have this 2-week period for adjustment. And so we don't think it's a disaster at all. We're going to look and see how it works, and we think this is a way to bring some relief to consumers. Having said that, you know, whatever action you take, there's always reaction. So, but the idea is to be as consultative as you can and try to do things in a smooth manner as you can. So any delay is no disaster. It's just to be able to, let's see how smoothly we can do this. Okay? Thank you.
Good evening. You spoke briefly in your presentation about how digitization can increase GDP. I wanted to know an example of that is being displayed in the Bahamas.
Not in the Bahamas because we haven't measured it as yet, but we will measure it. But if you, we had some discussion, I think, with the ministers. We were having some discussions around telecommunications. And the minister from Kenya was saying how they could see from their digitization program the actual, because they have digitized so many government services, that things become more efficient, and you actually see it. They have been able to measure it in the improvement in their GDP. And that is because you don't have to, you know, get in your car and drive from one location, stand in a line, get back in your car, and drive somewhere else. You can have a lot of these services done to the point where everything is electronic, and just the time saved and the productivity of that person who doesn't have to spend half a day trying to do something. And so we, in our digitization program, we have digitized just about, I think, 49 or 50 government services. We have the objective of doing 200 by 2024, 2025, and as we go along, we hope to see that manifested in our improvement in doing business, more efficiency and better use of resources. So at that time, we'll be able to measure it, right? Then I was using an example of some other country, namely Kenya, who has been able to do it. And it gives impetus to us to get on with it.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
I just wanted to ask about our prime rate. Do you see prime going up? Because, you know, prime would affect interest rates, which would affect the cost of borrowing and mortgages and so forth. What do you see happening with prime? As you know, in other countries, they have been raising the interest rate.
I thought you said crime, and I was trying to, you said prime.
Prime rate, sir. Prime rate.
Yes,
prime
I
rate.
know, I was, yes.
You just.
It's within the purview of the Central Bank of the Bahamas. I'm trying to remember the last time it was adjusted. I'm wondering if it was a good while back. Yeah, it was a good while back when they adjusted it downwards. I don't have any inside information as to their intentions, but given the amount of liquidity in the system, I couldn't see it going up right now. Okay. Yes, sir.
Good evening. Well, as we know, the government operates in a deficit right now, and that's mainly to satisfy the Bahamian people, correct?
Well, the government
anyway,
serves at the pleasure of the people, yes, yes.
I just wanted to know, I know that continues to decrease our sovereign rating. So how does the government hope to move out of this deficit, or if they don't hope to, how do they balance not going too much into deficit while still satisfying the Bahamian people?
Okay, well, our strategy is to grow the economy. Grow the economy, improve the revenue administration, do a better job of collecting what's out there, controlling your expenditure, and seeking out new sources of revenue. Now, a very important part of your question, or what comes out as a result of your question, is you said it's to satisfy the Bahamian people. And if you have an opportunity to look at the budget, what you would see is a very, very high component of budget going to things like salaries and benefits, debt servicing, etc. And then if we talk about your state-owned enterprises and the amount of money that is transferred to those state-owned enterprises. You're talking about your Bahamas Airs, your water and sewage, your ZNS, even your BEC, your BPLs, and your public hospital authority, and the amount of money that you expend, that you transfer from the central government to keep those going. And each one, for example, the criticism has been made that the government sends $300+ million every year to the Public Hospitals Authority, and they get back less than 10 in terms of revenue. All right, $40+ million to the Water and Sewage Corporation. Varies with Bahamas Air, could be as low as 15, it could be as high as 30. ZNS, 8 to 12, 16 or so. University of the Bahamas. And so that's why when I spoke about over the medium to longer term, you have to look at reforming these things because, the PHA, do you demand payment on arrival? Do you limit services? Water, do you raise the prices? Bahamas Air, how do we restructure that or reform that to be able to fulfill its mission to connect the islands, or do we outsource that? So those things, when you say satisfy the Bahamian people, that's a good way to put it, but a lot of those are essential services that you have to be careful when you're talking about how do we cut back or reduce services or require payment or increase prices, particularly in the environment that we're in. And unfortunately, we've been in these cycles where, there's never a good time to, or sometimes it doesn't seem that it's a good time to do this reform, but those things have to be done over time. And the wisdom has been that you get the economy booming. And so when you're talking about reform, you can easily transition people from some of these agencies into the private sector. But the short answer is the budget is, the allocations are very rigid that in the short term are difficult to change, but it has to be done over the longer term. And a lot of this stuff, when you talk about reform of state-owned enterprises, taxation reform, requires consensus and, amongst the population and amongst the parties. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
And please bear with me if you have said this before, and I apologize if I make you repeat yourself. Small business is my thing, as you might remember. I need to know what is happening with small businesses for the Family Islands. I'm in a position right now where I see a lot of proposals come through. It's actually a charity event and charity business, but I see a lot of proposals that come through, and it's heartbreaking because people have put so much effort into it. There's obvious need and desperation on the islands, and we don't know where to send them. Small Business Development Center is, I think, either overwhelmed or I'm not sure what's happening with it, but that doesn't seem appropriate for some of the businesses that are coming our way. What happens to the small man and his little idea that might be hope for a community, a rural community especially?
Yeah,
are there any plans?
Yeah, the SBDC is operational. They're fielding a lot of inquiries. When I came in and it was put under my portfolio responsibility, I charged them to go into the Family Islands and other traditionally underserved communities who would not have been reached by such government programs. So I would direct you there because they have a network of financial institutions that they can can provide guarantees, and so they refer to the various financial institutions, but they have a mission to ensure that they look particularly at the Family Islands, small businesses in the Family Islands. So that would be the first place, and they would be able to direct you. And they do get a lot of inquiries, so sometimes the response might not be as quick as we all like, but they will. Or you can contact me. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Minister. Going back to the question with NIB, I know she's looking for a little thing coming up. Has the government, to offset the impacts from COVID-19, has the government considered, separate from the biennial adjustments every 2 years, how about increasing that tax bracket for persons above that ceiling? Because I think the ceiling right now is about $3,000 per month. And what about, we have those expats and persons that come into the country that may be making $5,000, $6,000, up to $10,000 per month. Why not do an elevated tax deduction for those persons to sort of cushion that blow from the impacts of COVID?
That's an option. I'm not sure if you were here earlier when I said one of the options were to increase compliance and increase and improve the investment performance. I mean, that's a good point as well. The higher end, looking at that. So I think a lot of that is on the table. Yes, sir.
Yes. Good evening, Minister.
Good evening.
Nice to have you. A student mentioned
just
a few questions ago regarding an article in the newspaper, Michael Pintard's view on the price control effect on the economy. But you mentioned that the government would be sitting with stakeholders to discuss how you can mitigate their interests along with the consumers' interests. But the question is, as you sit with them, where do you think the pressure of the inflation is coming from? I know it's either the demand side or the supply side. The research showed that the pressure is really coming from the supply side. But is it coming from basically energy costs, or is it a profit issue? Do we have a profit push pressure issue when it comes to inflation?
I think it's a combination of all of that. Definitely supply side, meaning, the cost to acquire abroad have gone up. You've seen it. I mean, it's in the news all in the U.S. Energy costs have gone up. So hence transportation costs have gone up. So the cost to land things have gone up. We have tried to mitigate it by reducing customs duties. We believe that more of those savings can be passed through. And, in other countries, they have done things like windfall taxes on profits. We don't have, because we don't have corporate taxes. They've done things like that. Or they've done special COVID levies on corporations, i.e. increase the tax for a short period of time. In Barbados, they've done that. What we're saying is we are going to add these additional items to price control for a period. And we think that will result in some price reduction. And if it results in a bit of profit reduction, then I believe that's part of the sort of shared sacrifice that we all make. Headline.
Okay, I just want to jump in with a Facebook question from Roseanne Adderley.
Okay.
One pathway to Bahamian ownership is government part ownership of properties. Government share of profits incurred goes straight to benefit population as whole. Been done before. Was not this a model in part of earlier version of the National Hotel Corporation?
A government part ownership?
Yeah, to government share of the profits, when they have part ownership of properties, goes to benefit the population. Is that something being considered?
Yeah.
And that's our first question. And the second question is about public-private investment in green industries. Imagine Bahamas fully solar with locally owned or publicly owned entities in charge of that transition. Oil-based electricity bills are a huge cost both for government and private businesses.
Yeah. A good point on the second one. I think that was a comment. In terms of the question, the first question, yeah, I think the original, the hotel corporation would own properties outright. Of late, the government of the Bahamas has sort of taken portfolio, when I say portfolio, own shares in certain businesses, cable, the brewery, some other thing, Bank of the Bahamas, et cetera. And so that's an option, but, the danger is, yes, you share in the profits, but you also share in the losses. No matter what the business is, it's not always profits. And sometimes when the losses pile up, they come to the shareholders for injection. So I think there has been discussion in the past, for example, as part of the concessions that you give to, let's say, developers who are coming in. You get a part of the operation. How do you do that where you share in the profits but don't necessarily, you're not on the hook for any of the losses?
Good evening, Minister, everyone.
Good evening. Good evening.
This is a good segue to what you just said. I would like to see the Bahamians become the owners of our country and our different industries. In particular, in construction, and we're talking about the development that's happening. Most of the work that's happening in construction in our country right now, and between hotels and construction, those are the two major industries that we are actually seeing a lot of growth and development in. However, I would like to see us Bahamians as the leaders, being the partners with the developers who are coming. And my comment to you is I would really like to implore you to invite the local contractors who are in the business, who are growing their businesses now, to be the leaders, as in Turks and Caicos. No one comes into that country if the local person is not the business leader. And we do have the skill, the quality. You're now giving us extra money to work with. I would really like to see the flip side of this happen here. Second point to you. Well, let me ask you a question. Second question. is there a new policy that will be put on the table for our industry? Now that you're putting the contractors out front and putting more business platforms to the country for development, will there be a specific policy made for this type of business happening in the country?
I don't, you lost me on that, on that last one. You said, since we're putting a new policy.
Yes, you've opened the country, and more Bahamians are in a better position to do, not only since COVID, I think across the board, the government is really proving to the Bahamians that we're opening this country for any Bahamian who desires to do business, whatever level you're coming in, as low as even if you're going to extend a $5,000 loan to the average mom and pop shop. They don't have to live on the family islands. It can be someone that just developed a business during COVID.
Right.
But to give that opportunity to any one of us, if it's available.
Yes.
You know, there needs to be a measuring stick for that as well.
I agree, and I to your first point, and Mr. Sands has left, but and I'll say this, you know, sometimes we sit around the table and people come to us, and they say, I need to do this, I need to bring this in because I can't find this, and we need to be able to look on the side and see you, and you telling us, yes, we have it, because. You know, sometimes we have to go out and ask the question. But, you know, I can tell you, we're committed to making sure that our locals who are in the industry have the opportunity to have the first crack at the big business. All right, so that so that you're not confined to just the small business, but you can also aspire to the big business. But we need to know that when someone comes and says, I need this specialist, we need to be able to say, yes, we have it here. And I know we have it here because we're always talking to the, to the association.
And Mr. Sands left, but I am the vice president.
Okay.
And I am here, and I heard you, and Nassau hears you, the Bahamas hears you. And we're here to participate, and I love what you said earlier about communication. I do concur with you. If the communication is not extended, then nobody knows.
Exactly.
If people feel intimidated that they cannot approach the table or an email, or even this forum tonight, you're providing an opportunity for us to speak. We need to feel that we are open and free to speak whenever you need to know, because you can't make a difference if we don't speak to you either. Thank you.
Yes. Okay.
Good night, Mr. Minister.
Hello,
my question is, I don't know if you've spoken about it before, but I'd like to know more about Moody's and the downgrade of the Bahamas.
About Moody's?
Moody's, yeah.
Moody's,
I've not finished the question yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, the impact that it's going to have on the local economy, the government itself. And the second part of that is, I'd like to know what the government is doing in order to stimulate the Bahamian economy. Because if Moody's is going through the way it is, it's going to impact, I know, the businesses here in the Bahamas locally. The government has just the other day increased the minimum wage. So the way I look at it, there's some cost factors that are going to be coming in. Now, I don't know if the government is looking at, because they may be impacted on the international market when it comes to their borrowing capacity as it relates to Moody's, if they are doing anything internally that's going to impact the Bahamian people that's on the drawing board that we may not know now in the form of some upgrade, some taxation, although you're giving these the decrease in minimum wage. Is there something that the government is going to be doing or thinking about doing to offset whatever difficulties that they're going to be experiencing internationally because of the downgrade in Moody's?
All right. Let me answer you this way. We have some bonds trading on the international markets. There has been some commentary over the past few months that the prices are down. Is that a problem? Moody's came with their rating action, and since then the prices of the bonds have just been going up. You can Google it, look at the charts, right? Moody's, if you read their report, they wax eloquent about the strength of the economic recovery, about the improvement in the government finances, and then they talk about the potential of having some liquidity problem in 2027, right? We felt that that opinion was based on looking at what was going on in the secondary market. We think the secondary market does not reflect the fundamentals of the Bahamian economy, firstly because the Bahamas, whenever it issues sovereign debt, it issues it in small size because we issue for what we need. We are not a part of any of the emerging market bond indices because our per capita income is too high, and so that prohibits some investors from purchasing our securities. And so some people just don't buy because they buy the index. Secondly, or thirdly, or fourthly, if you go and try and buy any of those government bonds at the prices are so low, you can't buy them because the investors who hold them, by and large, they're holding them to maturity. I say all that to say we felt, and we expressed to the executive directors when I sat down with Moody's about 10 days ago, that we felt that they gave too much weight to what was happening in the secondary market, and the secondary market with those small illiquid sizes are very susceptible to manipulation, and hedge fund managers, et cetera, who want to do calisthenics in the market to try and get a return. I said all that to say we don't believe, and the reaction of the market since the ratings action shows that the market doesn't believe that their rating really reflects the fundamentals of the economy. They looked at how our bonds were trading in the secondary market and made an extrapolation that because of that, we will have difficulty refinancing something that's happening in 2027, 5 years from now. We disagree, and we told them that we disagree. So okay. as it pertains to doing anything to offset that,
yes.
It doesn't arise because we don't agree with the action.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
All right, we're going to take 2 more questions and then wrap up.
Good night, Mr. Minister.
Good night.
My question falls along the lines of tax reform.
Mm-hmm.
So we know that the Bahamas basically uses VAT, and we know that it's a regressive form of taxation. Would the government be looking into a more progressive type of taxation to increase the tax revenue for the government's fiscal deficit, to increase it and change it?
You said 2 or just, that was it?
To address the deficit.
You had 2 questions or 1?
1.
Okay, it was when we were doing the VAT implementation, right? 2 things came up. People said, "Listen, man, collect what people owe out there, and you won't have to do VAT." And then the next one was, "Man, we don't want a VAT. Give us the income tax," right? And I said, "Boy, if we had come with the income tax, it would have been the opposite." We did a lot of studies on this, and our advice is, there's a lot of merit to a progressive taxation. For example, progressive income tax. The more you earn, the more you pay. There's some risks with it in terms of evasion, et cetera. To move to that, when we did the implementation of the VAT, we felt it was a step, almost like a medium step, because to move to the position of income tax, personal income tax and corporate income tax will require more than just, we believe, the administration in power. That will require consensus, across the board. So that is something that you look at, but you realize that it's a fundamental change for Bahamians and something that you have to have their permission to do almost. Yes, sir. So we also, when we looked at it, being a tourism industry, 7 million visitors, if you had an income tax, they wouldn't pay income tax, but they pay VAT. Whereas if you look at your local tax base, 400,000 people, 200,000 in the workforce, you have to do some exemptions for, below certain levels, so you have a very small base on a personal level to tax. And then when you're talking about the corporations, that has other sort of implications in terms of how people report things like salaries and bonuses for tax purposes.
Last
question. So it's a longer term. Yeah, last word.
Good night,
Yes, sir.
good night. My question is, once again, directed to you. As a leader, right, when it comes to making decisions and it deals with economic factors and whatnot, and you have to, weigh the options between, hey, is this going to benefit the people, but at the same time, what's the loss, what's the cost and whatnot, right? What are your tips for decision making as a leader when it comes to economic problems?
You have to
be specific. Yeah, okay, that's cool. Okay, say for example, right?
Someone told you be specific.
Yeah, it just came in. Let's just bring out with the COVID-19 now, right?
Right.
And let's say the policies. Let's say you're a business maker, right?
Uh-huh.
And you want to make sure that you make money, but at the same time, you don't want COVID spreading in your business, so you make it mandatory that masks be worn. Even when the mandate drops, you still say, hey, I want it mandatory because even though I need the money, at the same time, I can't get sick.
Right.
What would be would you make that decision, is what I'm saying, knowing that, hey, if I tell people to wear masks, even though it's no longer mandatory, I might lose customers, but I prioritize the safety of my workers over the money.
And how do you do that in the government?
Yeah.
In the government sphere? I'll give you an example. Maybe this is a good example, I'm not sure. But you remember when the carnival was supposed to come?
Yeah, and you all declined it.
Right. And
Depression,
they said, well,
right?
we
Yeah.
got an approval. And we said, no, not really. And then at that time, Omicron was rearing its head. And the decision was made, notwithstanding, you had a lot of people say, I want to go to the carnival, I want to get a break.
I was one of them.
Right. You have to weigh it versus, schools were about to open, I think, at the same time, and you had this Omicron, so you make that decision. In a larger sense, you have to look at, when you talk about taxation policy, you have to look at, for example, how do you target it? Who can bear it? We haven't, I think for the most part over the years, we've had sort of like reductions. But you look at what is the impact and who can, you want to be able to say, okay, if I'm raising something, you want to target as best you can to those who can withstand it. And then, for example, I'll give you the latest example with the BPL adjustment. So we said, okay, we've held back on this adjustment upwards for as long as we can because the government is paying it. We have to let it pass through. But what we're going to do is those at the lower consumption level, we'll continue to exempt them from VAT on their bills, and we'll actually raise the threshold to $400 instead of $300. And so you try and look at, okay, what policy you're doing, what's the potential impact, who is it likely to fall on, and then can you do anything to mitigate it? All right?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Clear? All right. Thank you very much for listening to me. Invite me back sometime. Thank you.
Let's hear it for Senator the Honourable Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs. You don't do these events without enormous teamwork. And the Government and Public Policy Institute has a small team, but it has a powerful team. And I think you will agree that they provided an excellent forum for an excellent dialogue. And so with that said, I want to invite our policy assistant in the GPPI, our principal coordinator of these events, Jeannie Gibson, to come and give you a vote of thanks. Good night.
Protocol having been established, good evening. On behalf of Government and Public Policy Institute, I wish to thank Senator the Honourable Michael Halkitis, Minister of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Economic Affairs, for serving as special presenter in our 2022 Meet the Policy Lecture Series, and for using the occasion to provide post-pandemic fiscal policy options for the Bahamas. Tonight's discussion was extremely informative, Senator. There is a real concern among Bahamians about how to navigate these new economic waters as we tread the road to 50. May we be spirited and imaginative in the pursuit of right plans and principles, policies and people to move the Bahamas forward and upward. I wish to thank also the individuals who participated in the night's program, Mrs. Shivago Lang, our able moderator, Ms. Jenny Battle for singing a beautiful rendition of the national anthem, Ms. Natasha Piper for the invocation, and Ms. Leslie Archer for introducing our special presenter. Tonight's event would not have been possible without the assistance of other departments and areas here at the University of the Bahamas, namely Office of University Relations, Facilities Rental, Campus Police, Fiscal Plan Department, and our able protocol officers. I say thank you. Finally, but by no means least, I thank you, our audience, who are here in person, and those of you who are watching via Facebook live stream. Thank you for taking the time to attend, to watch, and to participate in this night's event. As I bid you good night, I wish to invite you to continue to support GPPI's Policy Maker Lecture Series as we seek to broaden and deepen public discussion for better policy making here in the country. Good night. Thank you for coming.